Welcome back to the MetaMinds podcast, where we help you master your mindset. My name's Eamon, and I run a video production business full-time.
And my name's Dan, and I'm a fully qualified counsellor.
And today we have Dr. Benjamin Hardy. If you haven't checked out our last episode from a few months ago, I encourage you to pause this episode, go back and check that one out because it sets up everything for this episode. Today we are talking about his new book coming out, which should align with this podcast very well, called Personality Isn't Permanent. They've got a lot of rapid. There it is. Beautiful. Nice. Stands out with the yellow. Love it. We have had a chance to have a good look through it prior to this, which is awesome. So we've got heaps of questions. So to jump into it, why did you decide to write this book, Ben?
Yeah. So in the, I think I can hear myself. No, I can't. No, I'm good. So in the fall of 2018, so Willpower Doesn't Work came out in March of 2018. In the fall of 2018, I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. Have either of you read that one?
No.
Body Keeps the Score. Put that on your list. If you're interested in trauma and about how trauma works. I always recommend that book by a lot of people. It's a tome. It's huge. I actually have it over there. But I read that book, and one of the things that I was not planning on writing a book on personality. It wasn't something that I was thinking about doing. It's quite a broad topic, quite a deep topic, quite a ethereal topic. There's a million different ways to look at it. It's less practical than something like willpower. But in The Body Keeps the Score, one of the things he shared two ideas that really hit me, and I'm like, okay, I have to write this book. One is that he talked about how trauma creates what's called a frozen personality, where your personality is literally frozen in the past, and you stop emotionally developing as a person, and you keep perpetuating the same situations over and over and over again. Basically, one of the core concepts or ideas about personalities is that it's your repeated or predictable, traits or attitudes and behaviors, and so one of the reasons why that is because of trauma and how trauma shapes you to being kind of predictable. And so I thought that was really interesting. And then the other thing he talked about is that trauma shatters imagination, and about how mental and psychological flexibility, which is key to imagination, is destroyed by trauma. And there's a lot of research and a lot of big ideas that I go into in the book about how important imagination and mental flexibility is to learning, to visualization, to going through concepts like, deliberate practice and developing expertise. And so I just really through change. And so I just thought, wow, like when you go through trauma, you get stuck in the past and you literally stop imagining a future, which would stop you from developing, and you become very dogmatic and rigid in your thinking. That was one of the things. Obviously, this book covers a lot of topics, but I just realized there's a book here, and I think I can really explain why personality is the way it is, and it's not what people think. Because most people think your personality is who you are. Most people think personality is innate. It's something you discover. It's within you. It's not changeable. And that's totally crap. I mean, even Gabor Mate, which we were just talking about in the former episode, he talks about how personality is a coping mechanism. And it's usually a huge aspect of it is a byproduct of trauma. And so I just wanted to write a book to explain, look, your personality isn't what you think it is, and it's not stuck and it's not rigid. It does change. It can change. And there are very specific and strategic ways that you can become the person you want to be. So that's really where it all came about.
Love it. So this is really interesting because I've just finished up Dr. Joe Dispenza's books, Becoming Supernatural. Are you familiar with his work?
I am. Yeah, he's his book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, was also influential. Even though I read that book while I was already researching for this book, but he talks a lot about personality as well, doesn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, and so just finishing up this Becoming Supernatural book, he talks a lot about how if you combine an elevated emotion with, potential future version of yourself, then you can create that reality. And I suppose that, that relates directly to personality. What an interesting frame to be frozen on.
Yeah.
Are you frozen there, or can you?
You're back.
You just froze, but now you're back. But you were talking about, the future state and the emotion.
Yeah. So I suppose, in the context of Dr. Joe Dispenza, do some of your, methods and things in Personality Isn't Permanent kind of align with that, or?
To some degree, yeah. I mean, Joe Dispenza is a very spiritual person, as am I, but his work is a lot more, he's smart. I mean, the dude has done his research. The guy has spent a lot of time studying neuroscience and, psychology. I mean, the guy actually knows his stuff, even though to a lot of scientists, he sounds like he's just like a woo-woo kind of like,
A little bit
but
like-
he's not. He actually really knows his stuff, although he is also very spiritual. But yeah, I generally agree with most of what he says. So like there's a lot of research now talking about, the psychology of your future self, about how your future self is someone you can define, and this makes total sense from a visualization perspective, but like, it's good for decision making to consider your future self as someone different from you, because they are different. The person who you're going to be in the future is going to see the world differently. Hopefully they have a better perspective of the future. Hopefully they're in a better situation, or at least in a different situation. But they're going to be in a different situation. They're going to have new goals, new perspectives, and you can imagine that person, and you can start to think about who that person is and who you want them to be. And then obviously you can shape your current identity and your narrative around who that person is and begin acting as that person now. So that's a big part of it. But I think a really healthy initial perspective is to think about who you were 5 or 10 years ago. Just you guys think about that for a minute. Who were you 5 or 10 years ago? Like, are you the exact same person you were back then?
Absolutely not.
No.
Totally different. Yeah.
So that's the almost the unanimous answer is absolutely not. I'm not the same person. And so the question then becomes, are you going to be exactly the same person in 10 years or in 5 years in the future as you are right now? The answer should actually be absolutely not. You're not going to be. But as people, we tend to think that who we currently are is who we are.
Yeah.
And the truth is that you're not. And so when you realize that you're not, then you can be a lot more flexible in how you see yourself. You can hold your current identity loosely, which is something that is a big problem with like personality tests and things like that, because what the personality tests do is they give you a label, which you then overly identify and overly attach to, and you assume that it's who you actually are.
I hate it so much.
No, personality tests, the problem with those type-based personality tests is that they're baloney. They're not scientific. They ignore context. You assume that the score you get is always true, when actually in different situations, you're going to show up differently. You're not going to be the same in every situation, but you think that you're the same because labels create tunnel vision. In psychology, we call it selective attention, but they lead you to thinking that you're always the same way when you're actually not. So like people with depression, as an example, or people who identify as depressed, think that they're always depressed, even though it's just not true. But because they've overly assumed the label, they become black and white and dogmatic in their thinking, and they have tunnel vision, and so they become mindless of the fact that it's often not the case. They also overly defend their label rather than realizing that they're not the same person as they were before, and they're going to be a different person in the future. And so you might as well start thinking about who you want to be and using your future self as the identity rather than what some test told you are. So, I mean, there's so many ways that you can then, there's one thing I will say. Have you guys ever heard of the concept of deliberate practice? Deliberate practice. So if you look up like the science of high performance and like optimal performance, like let's just say Olympic athletes or like world-class like musicians, you guys have absolutely heard of the 10,000 hour rule, right? You have to have 10,000 hours. So that idea came out of the research on deliberate practice. And basically what deliberate practice is deliberate practice is like, let's just talk about going to the gym for a second. There's a lot of people who go to the gym every single day and they do the exact same workout every single time. That is not deliberate practice. That's called doing something in a routine way, but not actually getting any better. Deliberate practice would be that you have a specific goal, and every time you do something, you're really pushing yourself. You usually are getting coaching, feedback, mentoring. And like, if it was in the case of going to the gym, like you would be going there for a purpose, and it would be towards reaching a goal, and you'd be getting better and better. In order to engage in that type of experience or that type of learning that leads to change, you can't do it without having a vision or a visualization of your future self with the skills you're trying to develop. It's literally impossible. It's impossible to engage in the type of learning that leads to purposeful, directed, and effective change without having a visualization of your future self with the skills you're trying to develop. It's also impossible to be hyper motivated and without having a clear and compelling goal and then a path to getting there. And so it's really helpful to start thinking about who your future self is and defining who they are and what's meaningful to them, and then beginning to clarify your identity so that you can know who you want to be versus overly defining yourself as the person you think you are.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as you were talking about personality tests, it actually reminded me of my undergraduate degree in psychology, and we had a section on personality. But what they made us do was they made us take a test early in the year, and then they made us take a test later on, and everyone in the class had a completely different score, right? Or a completely different kind of label put on themselves. And the whole example there was you cannot fixate on this being like one concept, like personality is malleable, basically. And I remember learning about that.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, like early on. That was years ago. I can't even remember what my ratings were or what I was labeled as. But I guess I'm curious, like, what other things can we learn from science when it comes to personality now?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of things. One is that it does change over time. You know, like it's going to change. Usually it actually becomes more tempered for most people. So like, let's just say you're a little bit stronger on like the introversion side or a little bit stronger on the extrovert. Usually all things revert to what's called the mean. Usually over time, you know, things kind of just, you become a little bit more neutral as a personality over time. You become less extreme over time. If you're not really seeking something specific. If you're seeking something specific, then you can become more extreme. You know, like if you want to become a public speaker, as an example, you can become way more extroverted. If you're wanting to be like a philosopher or a Buddhist, you can become totally introverted. So if you have specific goals, you can develop a more extreme personality or extreme tendencies. If you don't have any goals, you're going to become more of a neutral person over time, where, you know, like you just become less and less interesting, honestly. What the research shows is that people over time generally become less interested or less open to having new experiences. Like, you know, a lot of people have theorized that personality stops developing around age 30 because usually around age 30, people stop trying new things. They kind of get into a routine state where they're just doing their job. They're kind of, and so as far as personality, a lot of it has to do with your situation and a lot of it has to do with the roles that you're in. Like people are often in the same situations over and over, or they're in the same role, either in an organization or with their friend groups. And so role and situation predict personality, you know. And so if you're obviously in new situations and if you take on new roles, those things will show different signs in your personality, you know. And we talked about that a lot with the willpower doesn't work stuff. But if you put yourself in new situations around new people, and if you take on new roles, your personality can then take on what that role requires or what it needs. And so environment's something that you can and should design around your personality or around the personality you want, you know. So I think the big concept in this book is that most people, they're looking for their personality. They're trying to discover who they are, which is why they're attracted to things like personality tests, is because they're trying to find out who they are so that then they can build their life around their personality. They can then pursue goals that match who they think they are. They can avoid the things that are not natural to them. I will say, as someone who's a parent of 5 kids, that being a parent is one of the hardest things I've ever done. It's not easy. It's not natural, but I get a lot of purpose out of it, and it has changed my life. I will also say that anything I've ever done well was not easy for me. Like becoming a professional writer, it is not easy to write for me. It is freaking hard. Like I would say it's not what matches my personality. It's what matches my goals. And I've become the kind of person who can do it. And so rather than setting goals to match your personality, it's a lot better to match your personality to the goals that you genuinely want. And what I find that a lot of people don't do is a lot of people don't fully own and admit what they genuinely want. Like either of you, like, what do you truly want if you could have it and if you weren't afraid to pursue it? People often don't want to admit to what they genuinely want because they don't want, part of having a fixed mindset is being afraid to fail. And that in a lot of ways that comes from trauma. Like you are literally, it's high ego. Like you're afraid to admit what you truly want because you don't want you don't want then to be accountable to having people say, well, why aren't you pursuing that then? Or well, what if you fail? So people just downplay their goals or their desires, and instead they just pursue whatever is easiest or what's around them. So the most powerful and honest and authentic thing you can do is to fully own and admit what you absolutely and truly want, and then be very explicit about it and begin telling people about it, being open and honest about it, and making that your new narrative, because our identity is shaped by the stories we tell. And so if your new narrative and your new story is what you're going to do and what you're going to be because that's what you truly want and you can explain why, then you're going to start to become more consistent in your behaviors and more intentional in your behaviors towards your future self, towards the person you genuinely want to become. And yes, that's not you right now. There's a huge gap between you and that person, but that's where you're going. And you're now going to engage in motivation and through learning experiences that will lead you to becoming that person. That's key. And I can say freaking rare. How many people do you know who are fully honest about what they want and are telling everyone about it?
Yeah, slim to none.
Yeah,
but that's a big one, because that's first off imagining the future self and clarifying it so that you can live with intention. Subconscious is a big aspect of personality. Your subconscious is you on autopilot. It's you without thinking. It's you just going through the motions. You know, your subconscious makes up 95% of your behavior. So you guys are both breathing right now. Like, you're not controlling that, you know?
Yeah.
And so your subconscious is more a reflection of your current self and your past self. It's you without trying. It's your habits. It's a reflection of your current personality. If you want to become someone new, you can't live on autopilot all day. You can't just do what you know, and that's why environment is so key, is because your environment triggers a lot of just unconscious behavior. Like, you just mindlessly look at your phone and stuff. If you want to become someone new, you've got to spend most of your time actually living intentionally. And I think that's why morning routines and morning journaling are so powerful, because first thing in the morning, rather than just going into your addictive states, you give yourself space. You give yourself time to think about who your future self is, time to think about your goals, visualize them, think about them, and then say, what are a few things that I can do today that would move me in that direction? Some of them may require courage. Some of them may require just doing things that would make you progress. But every time you move forward with intention and often with courage, you begin having learning experiences. They're called peak experiences, but you have experiences that allow you to become more flexible in how you see yourself and less rigid. And you come to realize you build confidence, and confidence allows you to believe that you can do things and be things beyond what you currently are.
Well, it's like you're building more evidence to say that you are the type of person to then take that action, right?
Yeah. Every time you act a certain way, you're telling yourself that I'm this kind of person. Yeah. That's called self-signaling.
It's so fascinating to me because, you know, the mind is so powerful, but it's also so lazy. So, like, you know, when it has a thought, or when someone gives you, when someone gives you an idea, like, your mind takes it on board, identifies that, and then puts it in a little box over here, which is kind of what personality tests do, right? So, you know, it is really good in that way because it helps define different things, so you don't have to think, oh, that's a chair and that chair's for sitting on, you know. So it does that so that we don't have to actively think about what the purpose of everything is, so that we can then focus on, you know, surviving or whatever the actual important thing is, you know. So, but in that, you know, like, if you get up and you do the same things over and over again, then you are the type of person to do that thing. But then all of a sudden, if someone suggests, like, oh, why don't you go and do that? And you're like, well, I'm not really the type of person to do that thing. But that's just a story that you've told yourself over and over again. But it's like, it's so easy that if you just step back from that, you can just tell yourself a different story. Like, it's much simpler than we think it is, which is the most fascinating thing. Because, you know, as you said, it's very malleable, but, like, because we identify with things so rigidly, it's harder for us to get out of that. But really, it's much more fluid.
And the label, you know, I mean, you're spot freaking on, dude. I love how you've said that. It's interesting. I mean, if you do something enough times, the novelty wears off, and it stops being emotional, and it just starts to be something you identify with. So for someone, for example, who overly identifies, let's just say, as an introvert, and they say they're not the type of person to go up and just talk to random strangers. Okay. Well, if you go and do it enough times, you're going to realize that it's not that hard. And part of becoming a new person and becoming flexible and developing confidence and really developing the ability to learn, because really why personality gets frozen and repetitive is because a person stops learning and developing. They just literally, like, if you can learn stuff, you can do essentially whatever you want to do. If I can learn how to be social, then I can go and get good with people. If I can learn how to read books and acquire knowledge and information, I can do that. There's a really good quote, which I share in the book. It's from Alain de Botton. And he says, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. Right?
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, when I think about who I was 12 months ago, I'm not going to say I'm like a full-scale different person. There's a lot of me that's quite the same, but I've gone through a lot of experiences in the last 12 months because I do actively put myself in new situations. I do try things I've never done before. I am pursuing goals far beyond anything that I've currently accomplished. And I put myself through emotional experiences, which I'm open to. My views are very different, even from the person who wrote this book. I'm not the same person that wrote this book. Like when I listen to the audiobook of this book, there's a lot of the ideas I still freaking love, but I don't feel like I'm the same person that wrote this book. And I'm not. Like, I don't write the same way. I don't think the exact same way about a lot of things because I've gone through a lot of things. And this is a key. If your future self is a different person than who you currently are, and if they see things differently, hopefully they see things a lot better because they've learned things that you don't currently know. Then your current views of yourself and of life are immature compared to your future self, hopefully. About yourself. So Stephen Covey said, we see the world not as it is, but as we are.
Yeah.
You see yourself not as it is, but as you currently are. Yeah. Your identity is based on how you see the world, and you see the world through your identity. You also see your past, not as it is, but as you are. So you look at your past and your past narrative, your past story, your former experiences from your current perspective. And as you become more evolved and as you grow and develop, you're going to see your former experiences in a different way. Maybe the things that are traumatic, that really hurt you, you're going to actually finally see them as information that's very useful, that you're grateful for. And so it's just an understanding that as you develop and as you have a new context, you're going to see things differently.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing that really stands out to me as well, I know we've got to wrap it up soon, but the idea for me as well, like being a counselor now and working with clients, like a lot of clients and a lot of people I have around me as well, like they can kind of get wrapped up in this narrative that your personality is fixed and it's something that won't change. But if you really peel the layers back, like obviously there's institutions that could have influenced that, your parents, your peer group, everything that you've gone through in your entire life can shape what you think your personality is. But what you're saying basically is you're freeing up the opportunity for people to change their narrative and to create a preferred future self, which in turn, like for people who have experienced trauma, as terrible as it is, that can then create their identity as, well, I'm a victim potentially. But if they create this new narrative that, it's something that has happened to them, it wasn't, potentially in their control, then we can start working through a narrative that is preferred for them to move forward in a meaningful way. So like, to me, that just stands out as something really powerful for people in the mental health field as well, to work through personality not being a fixed thing, but being something that is malleable and that can change throughout your entire life.
Let's just put it this way. If your personality is overly predictable for too long of a period of time, like if you're showing up the exact same way for years, what that means is generally four things. You have unresolved trauma, which is leading you to the choices you're pursuing. You have an identity narrative, a story that's past focused, and that's just, you keep defining yourself the same way. Your subconscious hasn't been evolved through new experiences and new decisions and new choices. And your environment is the same as it's been. Your peer group is the same as it's been. You keep being in the same situation, in the same roles. Like, these are the reasons why you keep showing up predictably. It's not because you're some fixed, unchangeable being. It's because of these things that are keeping you in predictable cycles, and you can totally change those. One quick thought, and then I do have to go. And if you guys have any last thoughts you want to share, it's the idea of context. I've spent a lot of time thinking about context and about how context is more powerful than content. So this is one of the reasons why personality tests are garbage, is because the whole focus is on content. You get some score and you assume that it's always true. It's also about the past. Like if an event occurred, and if you're rigid in your thinking, then you assume that how you view that event is objective and it's fact, and that's actually fully true. And you focus on the content, not the context. So let me explain. My mother-in-law recently went to the gym to go work out, and there was a very overweight, like obese woman working out in the gym, huge, and she had very revealing, tightly fitted gym clothing on, like very tight gym clothing on, and it was kind of awkward for people because like this woman was very overweight, and she's wearing like these very tight gym clothes, and people were very much harshly judging her. Like they're like, "What the freak? Who's that?" You know, like. My mother-in-law was interested in this woman, and like they were working out next to each other, and she started asking her questions. And one of the things that she learned is that this woman has already lost over 150 pounds. So, question for you. If you know that this woman has lost 150 pounds, does that change how you think about her, how you view her?
Yeah, for sure.
How so? Why does it change how you view her?
Well, it's like she's already made the identity decision that she is not the type of person that is an overweight person anymore, kind of thing.
I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, yeah, but it's like, if you found out that this woman has lost 150 pounds, would you actually be pretty blown away and impressed by her?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So now no longer are you judging her as this big, fat, overweight, disgusting person, but you're like, holy cow, you're amazing.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. And do you actually believe that she's probably going to keep losing more weight?
Well, yeah, I mean, based on...
Yeah, so rather than this weird, strange, overweight person, so it's just an evidence that it's not the content, it's not her, it's the context. And once you have more perspective, it completely changes how you view her. And the same is true of anything. The same is true of yourself. The same is true of your memories. When you have more perspective and a better and different perspective, the thing you're looking at will be looked at differently. And when you look at it differently, it is different. There's a quote from Wayne Dyer, and he basically said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And so when you stop seeing things the same way, those things change. You stop needing to see it a certain way, and you stop saying that was a bad thing, and you start to realize that actually may have been a great thing. Or when it comes to yourself and your future self, you realize you can change. You're not just some stupid personality type. Like you can change, and you already have changed, and you will change. But if you become directional about it, and if you are willing to, on a daily basis, pursue that, you'll change your identity. You'll change how you view yourself. You'll be able to actually develop skills. You'll be able to become who you want to be versus just overly defining yourself and accepting who you think you are. So it's very interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, one of my favorite things to say is perception is reality. What you perceive to be true is true, and that's kind of, like sums up kind of what you're talking about there. So
that's why I think overly assuming a label really puts you in a box, and it really stops you from
limits you
being flexible and being able to change.
Yeah. So one last question before we wrap it up, guys. For everybody listening, the book is coming out on the 16th of June. If you're interested in some of those things we've been talking about today, I know I'm going to go and cop it. But is it coming out in an audiobook, Ben?
Of course.
Of course.
Oh,
great. Is that dropping on the same day?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, I mean, dude, you got to do audiobooks in today's world, my friend.
Yeah. Sure.
Cool. Well, we want to thank you so much for your time. We've learned a lot, and we both really love both of these kind of topics that we've been chatting about. So thank you very much, and really looking forward to reading the book fully, and then the next book as well. So
yeah, thank you so much.
You guys are awesome. I have to say, you two are a cool dynamic duo. You guys are both very different, but I love what you both contribute to the table, and thank you for the work you both do. And you guys are both really smart and awesome. Thank you for allowing me to be on your show. It was an honor.
Beautiful. Thanks very much, mate. We'll chat to you soon.
All right. You guys are amazing. Have a great night, okay?
You too,
See you later.
Great day, in your case.
It is morning, so...